everyone, welcome to Politics Unspun with me, Jack McCluskey.
And me, Charlie Carter.
We're two PhD economics students discussing the hottest political debates.
Anything from the NHS and net zero to HS2 and educational reform, we have got you covered.
And with the new government in place, there's no shortage of policies to talk about. Forget the personalities, scandals, or question dodging. We're here to make objectivity great again.
And because we're right about everything all the time, we're putting our reputation and future career prospects on the line to share our thoughts and opinions on each one of these deliciously controversial topics.
Well, I'm always right.
You son of a bitch.
We're here to put the policy back into politics, all while having a laugh at ourselves in the meantime. We hope you enjoy. Welcome to part 2 of our first episode of Politics Unspun, where we're talking about higher education.
What would your proposed solutions be to the current problems facing the UK, specifically the England higher education system? I know you have a couple of radical policies that I cannot wait for you to share.
Yeah, so I didn't actually get a chance to hear your response to one of these, so I'm excited to see what it is.
Half of it would have been bleeps and dropped.
Wow, that's
why the internet crashed, because I was just shouting. No, it wasn't. I think it was an interesting proposal.
Yeah, number one, I don't think there's anything wrong with our current system. I actually think it seems fairly well calibrated. I've already mentioned that, so I won't talk about it again. One thing I didn't say last
that's just because you're trying to get a government job.
Yeah,
that's why.
Guys, you are so amazing. Just let me help.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that I think needs to be sorted is the funding for master's education and postgraduate education. There seems to be a weird situation where it's fairly easy to get funding for undergraduate stuff. PhDs, we get a stipend, so of something like 18 and
we're
a bit
really
K.
not very good.
Shut up. But in the middle, you've got this master's education, which is incredibly valuable as a tool for a lot of people who have come out of their university, their degree, with one sort of education and want to pivot to something else. I mean, when you were doing your master's stage in economics or whatever, there were people on that course who weren't from necessarily an economics background. And it's very useful for people to sort of either retrain or they've realised, this is the sort of job I want to go into. And at our level of development as a country, where we've developed so that a degree might not even be enough education. I mean, 50% of young people now are getting a degree. Maybe a master's is what you need to really set yourself above and add productivity and value added. I think it's crazy that a lot of these high-end masters cost about 20,000 and your student loan will cover it's less than half, right?
Well, so if you wanted to go to Cambridge to study economics, you'd need to be copying up the best part of £20,000, which is the only reason I didn't get into Cambridge. Obviously. In some ways, the loan for postgraduate is a little bit simpler. You get a baseline loan of 10,000, which can cover your tuition fees and your living. But I don't know if any of you you're good at maths, but if tuition fees are 25,000 and you're only getting 10,000 loan, that covers £15,000 shortfall you have to cover yourself, which a lot of people obviously don't have, and that is a problem. And obviously leads to these sort of quite a vast difference in the quality of education for different postgraduate courses. I would push back slightly on prioritizing postgraduate education. I don't think it's as much of a priority personally. I think postgraduate education has almost become a little bit of a way of propping up undergraduate education in some ways, and might not. And I think if you're going down postgraduate education, it's going to be quite specialized. It's going to be quite focused. And I think for most people who want to do real jobs, that's not actually that important. And I think it's actually a relatively small percentage of the population that should be doing postgraduate. I think many more people are better off going into the workforce after earning an undergraduate degree or even earning A-levels and going into vocational training. I think that's so much more important. I would put less of an emphasis on the postgraduate system. I believe the people that are going into postgraduate system should be very highly qualified and very effective. And if anything, I think it should be made narrower but more effective. And I don't think the way of reforming postgraduate education should be to make it more widely accessible, because then you just sort of create a competition between people as, I did my undergrad, but then loads of people now getting the postgrad, so they all have to do postgrad. And you're essentially just keeping people on in education almost arbitrarily. and just keeping them on in postgraduate education for no real benefit. I think once undergraduate's done, most people for most jobs are ready to go into the world of work personally. But I understand it is a very complicated system and that causes some issues.
That's a fair point. But I do think that at our stage of development, a lot of our value added is going to be at the higher levels. And if we're creating a weird barrier that seems for no reason to this sort of very useful, the benefit of it is that it's a short course. Realistically, a master's can be, I mean, it can be 2 years, but it can be 1 year where you can use that year to retrain in something completely different. And maybe it doesn't need to be specifically a master's, but some sort of course which allows people to retrain is especially useful now when we've got this, AI coming in and the world is changing quite radically. I think it's important people have a way to retrain. And
definitely for retraining, yes. But in terms of just generally getting the population ready for these challenges, broadly speaking, would a better strategy and more cost-effective strategy not just be to gradually make undergraduate courses more challenging, as previous students stand on the shoulders of giants, as it were, looking backwards? Is it not the case that these courses just need to progressively become harder, rather than giving people this extra year, which I think should be reserved for people wanting to go down a very narrow course? I do agree with you on the retraining standpoint. I think that's really important. But I think that discussion of adult education is sort of separate, personally.
Yeah. See, I don't imagine it as like you do a master's after your degree sort of thing. I'm not thinking that.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm imagining it more as, again, you sort of retraining, pivoting to a new sector. I think it's really valuable. And the problem is currently, because of the way masters are funded, normally you have to get a company to sponsor you to do this masters. And that's not going to work very well if your plan is to use it to pivot to a new industry, because they're not going to want to pay for that. And I think there's some sort of issue there. But anyway, I don't want to use up too much time for that. But yeah, that was one. I'm going to ask you what your policy would be, and we'll sort of do a back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So mine are a little bit more, I'm relatively happy with the way the education system in the higher sense is. Mine is more pivoting towards allowing the government to have more policy levers over the choice of subjects, and also reducing the current financial problems on universities, and also making the taxpayer pay a little bit more to the contribution of student fees. And it might surprise you that on the basis of that, I first included increasing the level of tuition fees, or at least indexing it with the level of inflation to be able to support universities. Because without supporting universities, you really have a non-starter. Universities are where people are being educated. They're the basis of all research and innovation in the UK, and they could help to support private and applied purposes, and to maintain our world-renowned higher education institutions, which also project soft power, which we can talk about. We need to be able to fund them. And I think the first point of that is by indexing them against inflation, at the very least, if not increasing tuition fees, especially as we've been discussing, that it's really not that much of an additional burden on those who can't afford to pay those tuition fees, because most people won't pay them off anyway. And this would essentially fall a little bit more on the taxpayer. And we can talk about ways on planet. I would suggest funding this later on. But yeah, first off, indexing them against inflation or increasing tuition fees. And just to note, our favorite institution, the IFS, do support this policy, and they would say that this is the most cost-effective way of raising funds for universities with the limited impact on participation rates.
All I'm hearing is that you're not being very original, and you just read the IFS report and then come in this podcast and make me sound like an idiot, and I don't like it.
Yeah, listen. You want a job with government? I am begging for a job at the IFS. So I'm just going to name drop them.
Is this what it's going to become? That you're just going to say what the IFS think, and I'll be like, no, the government is correct.
If the job in the Chinese central bank doesn't come up, then I'll be going for the IFS. So the IFS, I love you, and you're 100% right on this issue. No, but in all seriousness, because I went back and forth with this one, because I don't know about you, but when I was looking at this policy, it is way more complex than people give it credit for. Because you're not only balancing the cost sharing issue, who pays for what, you're also balancing what point do higher earning graduates pay more than lower earning graduates, and who do you prioritize? because you've got incentive effects in that as well. So, you want to prioritize high paying degrees. So it's a very complex issue. So my policies are almost given better as a little portfolio of policies to put it in the least pretentious way possible.
No, it's still pretentious. Don't you worry.
No.
Portfolio. Are you joking?
A portfolio, a little cocktail of policies.
I like that cocktail.
A cocktail. Okay, fine. We'll go with that one. A little cocktail of policies where, yours are just flashy headline ones. So that'd be my first one, increasing tuition fees, at least indexing it against inflation. So yeah, your second one?
Well, this is going to be very boring, but I agreed with that policy. So
well don't.
1-0, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. Right. So I started with what I thought was going to be a light one. This is actually the one you disagree with a lot, right? So
I have strong feelings. I don't know if they're positive or negative.
Oh, right. Okay. So I think one of the reasons that tuition fees are capped is because technically universities sort of work like monopolies, given that to get a Cambridge degree, you have to have gone to Cambridge. You can't do that qualification anywhere else. You can't do that exam anywhere else. For people who don't go to university, you might not realize this, but it's not like A-level. You don't have like Edexcel, OCR, which are exam boards doing the same test for all places.
Yeah.
Universities they're not standardized. You come up with your own exam and you do it based on that. And I think this creates a monopoly. And I'm wondering if tuition fees... Oh, God, are you opening up the beer?
Okay, I'll talk about it after you've done with your serious stuff.
Yeah. Now, I'm wondering if tuition fees can be reduced by making it that anyone can take any university's exam. Obviously, you have to get into Cambridge to do the actual Cambridge education. And if their education is better, then that will stand you in better stead to pass their exam. But anyone could maybe pay £500 and do any university exam. We could have gone to Bath, done a Bath education, and then done the Cambridge exam and come out and say that we are essentially have passed the Cambridge exam. And I think the value of that, the reason I think that will reduce tuition fees and things, is that it creates other institutions. It allows them to have the incentive to provide a better standard of education for the same output, which is being able to pass these tests. I'm pointing at you, LSE, where you consistently come bottom or whatever of standards of student satisfaction and level of teaching, mostly because you've got lots of researchers who are very good researchers but have no intention of teaching their students. I don't want to job in LSE, just let you know.
I do love how we're just taking names in our first one, our first podcast.
Yeah.
I stand by this one though. LSE hit list.
God. It's like the Cornwall, isn't it? In Top Gear, we'll have like different institutions where they stand and like.
Well, so far we have, for some reason, government has ended up in what was the really good one in Top Gear? I forget.
Oh, no. If you want to talk about the really cool one, you had the little freezer. Can you remember that? You had
I'm not.
The super cooler.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. The super cooler. I'm putting IFS in super cooler. If anyone from the IFS is listening, if anyone from the IFS is listening, please.
I also would like a job. So
no. He's the Richard Hammond of this exercise.
That's so insulting. Oh my god.
We already insulted Richard Hammond. No, I like Richard Hammond. He's the best. No, he's not the best. They're all great.
Objectively the worst one, but carry on.
This is getting cut.
Big time. But if I may return to the issue, Charlie.
Absolutely.
The point is, if we took an example, maybe LSE, for some unknown reason, maybe something like the Open University could educate people to a better standard and get them to pass that qualification. And I think that could possibly reduce tuition fees. What do you think?
So before your internet cut out last time, we're completely uncharted territory now.
I know, and that scares me because it's been going so far.
So the first thing I said was, I don't know if I love it or I hate it, but it's an extreme. And I think there's no middle ground. So at the beginning I went, that is a really good idea, reducing the monopoly power of higher education institutions. It essentially will allow a more broad education and will allow people that didn't do as well in A-level as they should have done, will allow them to get a similar level of education that they deserve as someone who, had a really good day at their A-levels or whatever. And I do believe that's really important. I did have a concern that prestige of universities is really important. And I do believe that. because I think I wouldn't have worked nearly as hard at A-level had I not cared about, or had I had this fallback that I would have been able to do Cambridge exams. And by having that system, you do equalize university.
For you? Cambridge exams.
No. What I'm saying is, sorry, I didn't mean like that. Sorry, I didn't mean it like that. Yes, I had this back up.
For foreign listeners, Bath, I mean, that test is up there, and then Cambridge.
Yeah,
turn up drunk if you like.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. Big up Bath. No, but basically, I wouldn't have worked nearly as hard in my A-level had I not cared about the prestige of a university, or that the prestige of the university was lessened because I could have done that university's exams from a different lower ranked university. And I do think so much of the motivation behind further education systems, that is the A-level system, is based on the prestige of university. Because once you get your grades, it doesn't really matter. Once you get your grades, no one's going to really care about it when you go for a job. So I don't even think you can substitute that level of work ethic for grades, unless you made A-level grades more important. But I think that's wrong for other reasons. So I think I'm net negative on the policy, only because I think that incentive to work really hard at your further education is so important personally. But I'd have to think more on it. We've obviously spoken about this, and I had time to think about it, but I spent that time going to get beer and eating Terry's chocolate orange minis, which were really good, by the way. But I didn't actually think about it that much. Yeah. But I think in general, I'm net negative. But it's an interesting.
We've already disagreed more than Alistair and Rory on their podcast. So
don't get me started. No, I love Alistair and Rory. But we are now competitors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, right, your next policy. Go on. So your second.
Okay, so now you have to agree with me, right? Because then that's an agree to disagree, isn't it? We're leaving out. Okay, so my second policy would be. So obviously, my first policy, as part of my cocktail of policies, was to increase tuition fees, which is supported by the IFS asterisk. But also the second one is to reduce the amount of income that is paid on debt repayment once you graduate. Okay, so at the moment it's 9% post 27,000. I would reduce that to 5%. And essentially what that's doing is increasing the burden on government, reducing the burden on students. I think that's fundamentally because I believe that universities need higher education, higher funding. So I've increased tuition fees, but that's artificially increased the burden on students. Because of Jack's calculation and other things we've spoken about, I think that burden would then be too high. So I then think it should be reduced in the form of reducing income that is paid on student debt. And I also think, like I said earlier, that would improve the functioning of the labour market, the job ladder, and allow students the ability to move with a little bit more financial freedom across different jobs. And I also think it would help in their ability to manage the cost of living crisis and be able to put a deposit down on a house, which I think is so fundamental for individual security and just general life prosperity, which is generally the whole goal of all of this. So yeah, that would be my second one, reducing the amount of income that's paid on debt from 9% to 5%. That would be my second one.
But I guess so to disagree with you, again, I know we've done it twice now, it's amazing.
You son of a bitch.
So I disagree, but I'm going to point out one thing you said. So you say that it would help you save for a deposit more, whatever. But if we're having to spread it across the population anyway, it means that taxes would have to rise elsewhere, right?
Yeah, possibly. But it depends on how you finance it. That's the other thing. I think that the argument against reducing the cost of education on students, the argument against that has been basically that taxpayer pays for it anyway. But it's a little bit of a broad brushstroke argument. You do need to think about, well, how are you going to finance it? And the way essentially I would finance it wouldn't be through necessarily broad income tax increases or other things like council tax. There'd be other mechanisms for paying it. But yeah, that would be the
formed your full cocktail. Then
yeah, so I've added the little cherry on top. I've added the whipped cream.
Yeah,
I've added
the whipped cream. Your cocktail sounds horrific.
I don't know, mate. I reckon I could make it work. The cocktail of policies is much better than the cocktail I could make in real life. Let's just put it that way. Okay, so that would be my second one. But that would your argument has been noted, read, and rejected. No, I'd essentially say that would be my justification. You would change tax policy in a different way so that it wouldn't affect financial freedom of recent graduates. Yeah. All right. Final one.
I like that. I quite like to be honest, I don't believe in this one as much. It's the first two that I really like.
This is the only one I haven't
you've
heard
made
of.
me do 3, so I'm
Okay,
going to say
good.
this one is just to get the policy out there more than anything. I do like the Welsh system on the maintenance loans. I like the idea
Okay.
that everyone gets the same maintenance loan, but it's just the portion that's grant compared to subsidy. Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I don't like Welsh anything. So I think it's hard for me to...
Again, another bit that's cut out.
Sorry. I had to say that.
God's sake. This is Charlie 3 beers down.
I don't know enough about the Welsh system, if I'm completely honest.
It's literally
So
just
I probably
that
couldn't-
everyone receives the same grant or can apply for the same level of maintenance loan. So that's up to about 10 and a bit £1,000.
Okay. All right.
And
yeah,
then
no, I get it.
the portion that is a loan and the portion that is a subsidy changes depending on your household income. So if you're higher income,
What do you mean?
most of it's loan.
Okay. All right. Got you.
Whereas when you're a lower income household, it's mostly grant.
No, okay. So I agree with that policy. I think it's really good. Fundamentally, because in the English system, if you have parents that have higher income, you can't guarantee that higher income is going to be filtered down to the student. And I think it's a point of individual, I think it's an individual issue. It's an individual decision as to how much money you take out on a maintenance loan. So I don't like the English system where you are mandated that you're allowed to take out a particular amount on a maintenance loan. So I would agree with that.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it has many broad implications, if I'm honest. I think the only real importance it has is allowing students to be a little bit more well-funded at university, which you could argue could translate into educational outcomes or whatever. But I think there's a little bit of nuance to that.
Well,
but yeah, I think it's
the
a good
important
policy.
part of it is, well, there's 2 parts really. The caveat is that we can't assume that parents are going to give extra money to their kids, and that we make up for that change in the progressive nature of the policy through taxes, I think. So that's an important caveat. But the second point is it comes with this idea that I think education should be like a job, in my opinion, and you shouldn't have to be doing you and me both had to do sort of secondary jobs on the side to supplement our maintenance loans so that we could afford rent and things like that. I think that takes away from your ability to really get involved in your education. You're not fully focused on that. And if you lose part of your weekend having to do a part-time job to afford rent, it's a problem. I think that education should really feel like a 9 to 5, and you should make the most of those 3 years.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. I do think if you look at the reality of the situation, and to play devil's advocate, because I do like it as a policy, realistically, giving students, undergrad students in particular, a little bit more financial freedom, will that necessarily translate into taking their studies more seriously, or will it translate into other things? And I know it sounds, I mean it as a serious point, but you've got to balance those 2 effects, because realistically, you can't necessarily assume that money is all going to go into academic effort, as much as that would be an ideal world. And I do think, as just part of basic humanity, you need to be able to finance undergraduate students slightly better, because to put it in perspective, had I not worked a second job, I would have been earning £4,000 a year as an undergraduate student, because I had the minimum maintenance loan. I would have I think it's about £4,000 a year. So I had to to be able to get it at least to 10. I think that was always the goal. But you're still living on £10,000 a year to pay for everything, which is always a stretch. So I do think as a part of basic humanity, you need that, but you also can't necessarily assume that's going to translate into higher academic effort, as much as that would be
I guess
ideal.
it's linked to this idea. I feel there's almost an assumption that in first year you don't actually do 100% of your time is education. A lot of it's partying or whatever. And I don't think the public should be paying for that. I do think that
I agree
that the intensity of education should increase, and part of that package is to say, okay, well, you're receiving a full maintenance, you're not having to do a second job. This is your job right now, is to educate yourself, and it's a 9 to 5.
There's a couple of different ways to go down that, but I think, controversial opinion, this isn't part of my 3. But I think that's fundamentally going to come from making undergraduate courses harder.
Yeah.
Because, and that is a really unpopular thing to say, possibly. Yeah, I've completely lost my train of thought.
No, I agree with what you said though.
No, sorry, I've got
university degrees should be harder. And I think that it's not just contact hours, it's the amount of hours that are expected outside of that thing. I mean, so just to add an example. So my girlfriend's training to be a medic. She obviously has to revise all the time because the amount of things you've got to remember for for that course is extreme. And then she's living with people who are doing other courses, will not name which courses, that seem to be out all the time, never revising, and then do sort of a month before the exam, revise, and then they're sort of okay. And that really shouldn't be the system. It should, and bearing in mind that she's receiving the same level of loan as they are, even though their contact hours and their actual hours that they put in are much lower. And I think it's not about how difficult the course is, but how many hours you have to put in it should feel like a 9 to 5, right?
I agree with you. And I think that better prepares you for work. Also, because a lot of people argue that university promotes social cohesion, which is true, but also it should be promoting social cohesion in the form of a work environment, right? And I think by having higher levels of time, you build bonds and you socialize, but in different ways. And I mean, some of the best parts of my university years were when I was working on really hard group projects with people. I didn't enjoy it, but it really built some bonds with people. But I thought it was great. I mean, and I think that would be a really good way of promoting it, is just by you have these harder courses that promote more group work, promote more of everything, essentially. But then you've got to run into the fact that it's going to cost universities more. And then you run into the tuition fee element again. So, which is...
See, I don't like that argument, and I'll tell you why, right? It's because
Why not?
if making people work harder costs more, that's only because we're spreading it over the same period of time. You could condense, if it is just they're wasting a lot of their time, you could condense it into 2 years, and then it takes...
Yeah, you could condense it into 2 years, but then essentially the amount of work that is done is the same.
Yeah, but over 2 years, so it's more intense.
Yeah, it's more intense, but I'd agree with that. But I mean, broadly, the whole reason I want a harder education system and a more intense education system is because it's harder, not necessarily just because it's the same in short time, although it is more efficient the way you're saying. I would say it's better to have a system that is just generally harder, and you have the 3 years, but graduates come out much more accomplished within those 3 years than they did previously.
Just to convert that into a policy, I mean, currently it's just an idea. Make it harder. What sort of policy levers does the government have to make university harder?
It's a really good question. Well, I do think, I mean, this actually transitions quite well into my third point, which we have got sidetracked from. But my third point essentially was that adding these tuition grants, teaching grants, is a really good way of doing this.
You left that to third. I was waiting for that as number one.
No, I wanted a knockout punch. I wanted to add the cherry on top with the whipped cream.
With the whipped cream, another cherry you've already got, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I wanted this as like this is the fundamental policy where you have teaching grants that are given to different subjects, to different departments based on the provision of a particular subject. And they come with contingency clauses. So firstly, I'd really want the reduction of the admin state relative to academic staff. So anecdotally, you look at the particular universities that we work in, you do see a massive rise in the amount of admin per number of front of house staff. Think about academic staff. And I do think that's a problem. And I think it's contributing to the financial pressures that universities are seeing. I do want these teaching grants to be contingent on working with applied policies and working with governments and working in the private sector. I think research has a massive part to play in the promotion of research and development and effective policy making in the public sector. And then thirdly, I think that ties in really nicely to what you were saying, is that you could essentially have an independent body that assesses the difficulty of particular courses. And yes, it should vary across university based on entry requirements. But I do think you need a system whereby you can make these courses harder. And I think they need to become harder. I think they need to become more intense. But then again, this is why it's a cocktail of policies, Jack. That ties into the first policy of increasing tuition fees, increasing tuition grants, which can then contribute to the better funding of these research institutions, which then allows them to create better courses and more intense courses and more valuable courses. And that's and then also I think tuition grants should be given on the basis of whether students are given placements. I think that's a massive thing. I think courses should really start to be given placements. So for those of you that don't know, Bath and a few other unis are very, very hot on, in the third year of an undergraduate course, doing an industrial placement in the field of that particular degree. So you have first year, second year of just exams and coursework. Third year, you go work for a company. Fourth year, you go back and do your final year of degree. And I think that should become the standard for university courses. I think that's massively important. And I think tuition grants are an incentive system that can be put in place for universities to do that, personally.
Well, I think that's a fantastic ending point. You know why? Because I think that is the key takeaway, is that these teaching grants seem to be a policy that we both strongly agree with. I mean, personally, I'm still wedded to my sort of standardization or open exam format for universities, but I'm willing to concede that.
Well, that makes 50% of us. No, I think it's a very interesting point. I just need to think about it a little bit more and mull on it. But it's a fascinating idea.
Is that this teaching grant idea, I think we can both get on board with, and that's the key takeaway from the episode. So I hope that people at home will make up an imaginary person. I believe we called him Clive.
Person at home.
Yeah, not plural.
Clive.
Just one person, Clive. I hope you, Clive, have really enjoyed this episode.
And Clive, call in whenever you feel like it. We're here to listen. Yeah, call in, Clive. I think this has been fascinating, and I think we decided we picked this as a policy because we thought it'd be relatively simple and easy to talk about. But realistically, a 20-minute episode has turned into about an hour. Also, if anyone ever makes it to the end of this episode, congratulations, you are the only person on earth to ever do so. So yeah,
shall we clap
and I
for
didn't make it. So yeah, on that bombshell.
Oh no. Right, goodbye to our listeners. I think it went well.